German Shepherd wouldn't leave the bridge. What rescuers found underneath was unbelievable. A cry in the silence. A loyal friend who refused to walk away. And a moment that touched an entire community. This is not just a story, it's proof that love never fades. What about you? Do you think animals can teach us about humanity? Like, share, and subscribe to keep stories like this alive. The evening had grown colder than usual, the kind of chill that crept into your bones even when you wrapped your coat tighter. Mist hung low over the town's old bridge, the kind of bridge that had carried generations across the river but now stood weathered, with paint peeling and wood groaning under the weight of time. Most people passed it without a second thought. It was just part of the town, like the clock tower or the church bells that rang every Sunday. But that night, something was different. Something about the bridge refused to let the night stay quiet. At the far end of the bridge, a German shepherd sat firm, his paws pressed against the damp boards. His amber eyes darted between the dark water below and the road ahead, but no amount of calling or coaxing could make him move. His chest heaved as he barked again and again, the sound echoing through the fog, bouncing off the riverbanks like a warning no one could understand. People walking home from the diners slowed their steps, staring at the dog with unease. A couple paused their car headlights on him, wondering if he was lost or abandoned. Yet the shepherd looked far from lost. His stance was steady, his gaze fixed, as if he knew something everyone else had missed. Whines broke through his barks now, sharp and desperate. He pawed at the wooden planks of the bridge, circling, then stopping at the same spot as if marking it with his own body. A group of neighbors gathered, their voices low, their faces puzzled. "Why won't he leave?" someone whispered. "Dogs don't act like this for no reason." An older man shook his head slowly, remembering stories of dogs that sensed danger long before people ever did. The night deepened, the mist growing thicker, curling around ankles and filling the air with damp silence. All that broke it was the shepherd's restless cries. A little girl in a blue dress clutched her mother's hand tightly, her wide eyes locked on the dog. She tugged and whispered softly, "Mama, he's trying to tell us something." The mother hushed her gently, but even she couldn't look away from the strange sight. The shepherd's tail stayed stiff, his ears pinned forward, his whole body a picture of urgency. He wasn't just waiting, he was guarding. Guarding something unseen, something that tugged at his instincts with a force stronger than hunger or fear. The bridge groaned as more people stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a feeling that the dog's warning mattered. Something lay beneath that old bridge, something wrapped in silence, waiting to be uncovered. He barked again, louder this time, his voice cutting through the fog like a bell that could not be ignored. The sound made hearts race, pulling them closer to the rails, to the edge, to the darkness that waited below. They didn't know yet what they would find, or how it would change them. All they knew was that the German shepherd refused to move, and his loyalty, his stubborn cries, were a call no one in that small town could ignore. And when they finally answered that call, when they leaned closer and dared to look beneath the bridge, what they discovered shattered every soul who stood there. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was the beginning of a truth no one had ever expected to face. The old bridge stood like a weary guardian at the edge of town. Its stones were cracked and covered in moss, worn thin from decades of rain, storms, and footsteps. The iron rails bore rusted patches, whispering of a time when they shone bright and new. Below, the river rushed with a restless voice, its waters foaming white in places, deep and dark in others. To outsiders, the bridge was nothing more than a crossing, but to the townsfolk, it was a place wrapped in whispers. Some avoided it after sundown, claiming the air there felt heavier, colder. Others said the mist that often clung to the wooden planks was not just fog, but the breath of forgotten souls. Stories had grown around it like ivy over the years. Elders recalled accidents that had taken lives. A carriage slipping during a storm, a young man falling in one winter night, a child swept away when the river rose too high. Each story carried pieces of truth, though no one remembered them all. And so, the bridge became more than stone and wood. It became a place where fear mixed with respect. Parents warned their children not to play near it. Teenagers dared each other to cross it at midnight. But most people simply walked faster when they reached its middle, whispering a quiet prayer until their feet touched solid ground again. On a gray afternoon, when clouds gathered like heavy curtains across the sky, a small figure made her way down the worn path toward that very bridge. She was only 3, a little girl in a blue dress, her hair tied neatly with a ribbon that bounced as she skipped. In her tiny hand, she held onto the leash of a strong German shepherd whose stride was steady, protective. To the girl, the dog was not just a pet. He was her shadow, her guardian, her best friend. The people of town often smiled when they saw them together. The sight of innocence and loyalty walking side by side softened even the hardest faces. But that day, the shepherd was different. His ears pricked high, his nose twitched at the damp air, and his eyes fixed on the bridge ahead with unusual sharpness. The little girl tugged at his leash, humming softly to herself, unaware of his growing unease. As they neared the first stone pillar, the dog slowed, then stopped altogether. His body grew tense, his tail stiff, a low rumble rising from his chest. "Come on, boy," the girl said in her sweet, small voice, tugging gently. But the shepherd would not move forward, nor would he turn back. Instead, he pulled her toward the center of the bridge, his nails scraping against the old planks as if every step carried a sense of urgency. By the time they reached the middle, the little girl frowned, confused. She looked around, seeing nothing but the familiar river rushing below, the mist rising to kiss the rails, and the cracks in the stone where weeds had claimed their place. To her, it was the same old bridge she had seen many times before. But to the dog, it was something more. His nose pressed to the ground, circling the same spot again and again. He barked once, then again louder, his cries echoing over the water. The girl flinched but did not let go of his leash. Instead, she whispered, "What is it, boy?" The shepherd pressed his paw against the wooden plank, then pawed at it fiercely, as though something beneath demanded his attention. His ears twitched at sounds no one else could hear, his body trembling with an urgency that filled the air. The little girl's eyes widened as she realized this was not play. The dog wasn't chasing shadows. He was warning her, warning everyone, of something hidden just beneath where they stood. From the banks of the river, a farmer heading home paused to watch. The barking was unusual, more than just noise. It was sharp, insistent, filled with purpose. Others began to notice too. A woman walking back from the market stopped at the path's edge. An elderly man sitting on a nearby bench lifted his head. Soon whispers started again. "That dog won't move. What's wrong with him?" The shepherd did not care for their stares or their whispers. His world had narrowed to that one spot on the bridge, that one secret pressing beneath the boards. And as the girl crouched beside him, her tiny hand resting gently on his back, her innocent voice carried across the mist, "He's trying to tell us something." The river roared beneath, the clouds gathered closer, and the bridge itself seemed to groan under the weight of mystery. What was hidden there? What secret did the shepherd sense that no one else could? The answer waited in silence, deep beneath the planks, ready to rise. And though the townsfolk did not know it yet, that dog's refusal to move was about to pull them all into a story they would never forget. The German shepherd would not calm down. His body moved with a restless energy, circling the same patch of boards on the bridge as though something invisible held him there. His claws scraped against the damp wood, sharp sounds that cut through the evening mist. Every few seconds, he paused, ears stiff, head low. and let out a growl that rumbled deep in his chest. Then he would bark, sharp and urgent, his voice echoing against the stone pillars like a cry that demanded to be heard. The little girl in the blue dress crouched beside him, her small hand brushing his back in a soft attempt to soothe him. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice carrying the innocence of a child who trusted more than she questioned. But even she could sense this was not ordinary behavior. The shepherd's body trembled as he pressed his paw against the wood again and again, his nails digging at the edges as if he could tear through to whatever lay beneath. His breath came heavy, his eyes sharp and alert. The girl tugged at his leash lightly, but he did not move. Instead, he shifted his weight forward, almost pulling her closer with each insistent scratch. She let the leash fall slack in her hand, realizing that this time she could not lead him. He was leading her. She tilted her head, watching his movements with a mixture of confusion and wonder. Deep down, she trusted him. Dogs didn't bark like this for nothing. It wasn't long before others noticed. A man carrying a basket of apples slowed his steps as he crossed the far end of the bridge. He frowned, watching the dog's frantic circling. "What's gotten into him?" he muttered aloud, his voice carrying across the mist. A woman on her evening walk stopped too, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders as a shiver ran through her. "That dog's seen something," she whispered to herself. Soon her eyes turned. A pair of teenagers on bicycles paused, resting one foot on the ground, their curiosity battling with unease. An older woman carrying groceries from the market hesitated at the foot of the bridge, her face pale. The shepherd barked again, louder this time, his whole body lunging against the leash. The sound was not playful, not careless. It was warning, urgent, and desperate. "Why is he acting like this?" someone asked from the growing circle of onlookers. "Dogs don't just do that." Another voice added, "Maybe something's under the bridge. Maybe he smells it." The words rippled through the group, stirring the air with unease. The baby girl looked up at them, her wide eyes reflecting the foggy light. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hand stayed on the shepherd's back, steady, trusting. She didn't understand what he wanted, but she felt it. The way his growl vibrated through his body, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the boards beneath them, it meant something. The air seemed heavier with each passing moment. Even the river below sounded different, its rush blending with the sharp rhythm of claws scratching wood. The shepherd pressed his nose close, sniffing hard, then whined, a heartbreaking sound that sent chills through the listeners. He circled again, his tail stiff, his ears twitching at every sound in the mist. He stopped suddenly, pawing hard at a single plank, his bark rising into a frantic plea. The neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Fear crept into their whispers. "Maybe the bridge isn't safe. What if he smells something bad? I've heard dogs sense things people can't." The words piled on one another, each guess fueling the tension. Even those who didn't believe in superstitions felt their stomachs twist with unease. Through it all, the little girl stayed close, her small frame pressed against the shepherd's side. She whispered again, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them, "I believe you, boy." Her words were soft, but they seemed to carry into the silence, as if the mist itself had heard her. The German shepherd gave no sign of calming. His urgency grew with each passing second, his scratches deeper, his barks sharper. Whatever was hidden beneath that bridge, he knew it mattered. And though the townsfolk had not yet decided whether to listen, the dog's persistence would not let the mystery rest. His alarm had been sounded, and soon, no one in that small town would be able to ignore it. The mist clung to the bridge like a veil, refusing to lift. By now, the German shepherd's sharp barks had drawn a small crowd, and more people trickled in as word spread through the narrow town streets. One by one, familiar faces appeared, each carrying with them their own unease. The first to step closer was a farmer, his boots muddy from the fields. He leaned against the wooden rail of the bridge, his weathered hands gripping his hat. "I've worked this land for 40 years," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. "That dog knows something. Animals always do. My cattle act the same way when a storm's coming." His eyes, tired but honest, remained on the shepherd, who was now scratching so hard at the boards his paws left faint marks. A schoolteacher arrived next, holding her shawl close as if it might shield her from the chill of both the fog and the moment. She remembered the bridge too well. It was where she had once lost a student to the fast waters below. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "This place has never been right. Children whisper about curses, but I've always told them it's just stories. And yet, look at him. He's telling us something's there." She glanced down at the river, her face pale with the memory of a tragedy she could never erase. An elderly grandmother shuffled forward, her cane tapping softly against the stones. Her wrinkled face was lined with years of grief and wisdom. She gazed at the shepherd with misty eyes, whispering words only she could understand. "I buried my boy not far from here after the war," she said softly, her voice breaking. "And I know this feeling. This is not madness. This is warning. The dog's heart is restless because he carries a truth we don't yet see." The crowd parted as the local policeman arrived, his lantern casting a warm glow that cut through the fog. He was young compared to most, but the responsibility of keeping the town safe weighed heavily on his shoulders. He raised a hand to quiet the murmurs. "All right, what's all this about?" he asked, though his eyes were already drawn to the German shepherd. The dog had stopped barking for a moment, panting heavily, his nose pressed against the damp wood as if listening for whispers from below. The baby girl in the blue dress remained by her dog's side, clutching his fur. She looked up at the policeman with innocent eyes. "He won't move," she said, her small voice clear in the silence. "He wants us to listen." The simplicity of her words made even the adults pause. The farmer spoke again, his voice firmer now. "He hasn't eaten, hasn't sat still since I got here. He's not just restless. He's guarding something." The teacher nodded. "Look at him. He won't even touch the food basket. I've seen dogs beg for scraps in the schoolyard, but this one, he's refusing everything. His eyes are fixed below, as if he knows what lies there." Indeed, the shepherd ignored every kind hand that tried to calm him. A woman offered a piece of bread, another whistled gently, but the dog didn't blink. His gaze was locked downward, his ears twitching at the faintest sound of the rushing water. Then came the sound again, a low, throaty whine that made the hairs rise on every neck. He pressed his paw harder against the boards, scraping furiously, then barked with such force that the bridge itself seemed to tremble. The whispers grew louder among the gathered townsfolk. "Maybe there's something caught down there. Could it be an animal? What if it's more than that?" Fear laced with curiosity spread like ripples across the crowd. No one could ignore the urgency anymore. The policeman shifted uneasily. He had grown up in this town, had heard every rumor about the bridge, about the man who drowned, about the wagon that fell into the river decades ago, about voices that some claimed to hear at night. But he had always dismissed them as old stories. Tonight, with the shepherd refusing to budge, those stories pressed on him like a weight he could no longer ignore. The grandmother lifted her cane and tapped the wooden boards. "If the dog insists, we must at least look. What harm is there in listening to him? We owe it to the past, to the ones we lost here." Her words sank into the hearts of those gathered. The teacher wiped her eyes, the farmer sighed deeply, and the policeman hesitated, his lantern swinging slightly in his hand. The mist thickened, wrapping them in a cocoon of silence except for the shepherd's relentless whines. The little girl hugged her dog's neck tightly, burying her face in his fur. He leaned against her for a brief second, his growl softening, before returning to his frantic pawing. It was as though he had borrowed her innocence to fuel his determination. The farmer finally spoke what everyone had been thinking. "We can't just stand here. We need to know what's under this bridge. Whether it's an animal or something else, this dog isn't going to stop until we do." The policeman raised his lantern higher, looking at the uneasy faces around him. He knew the decision would not rest on him alone. It was a choice for the whole town to make, whether to disturb the silence of the bridge or turn their backs and live with unanswered questions. The grandmother's voice carried again, steady and firm. Sometimes the dead ask to be heard through the living. Tonight, this dog is speaking for them, and I, for one, will not ignore it. The shepherd barked once more, a powerful, soul-stirring sound that echoed over the rushing water, sealing the moment. The crowd fell silent. Their fear was still there, but so was resolve. The bridge that had carried whispers of sorrow for generations now demanded truth. And with every paw strike, with every bark, the German shepherd made sure they would not walk away. The decision was made. The townsfolk could no longer ignore the shepherd's cries. That night, under the heavy mist that wrapped the bridge like a shroud, the men returned with lanterns, ropes, and hearts pounding with both fear and duty. The farmer carried an old coil of rope he used for pulling hay bales, while the policeman brought sturdier climbing gear from the station. Their lanterns glowed in the fog, each flame trembling against the cold wind that swept across the stone arch. The river below roared with a voice of its own. It wasn't a gentle stream, but a furious current that had carried many secrets away over the years. When the mist parted, even for a moment, the townsfolk could see the swirling white foam smashing against rocks beneath the bridge. The sound was deafening, yet somehow the shepherd's sharp barks cut through, piercing every ear. He leaned dangerously close to the edge, his nails scraping the old stone as if he wanted to leap in himself. "Careful, boy," the farmer called, rushing to steady the dog. But the shepherd only pressed harder against the edge, whining in frustration. His whole body trembled, tail stiff, ears forward. It was no ordinary curiosity. This was desperation, as though he knew life itself depended on what was beneath that bridge. The policeman set his lantern down and unrolled the ropes, his face tense. "We'll go down," he announced. "We'll look underneath. If there's something trapped, if there's someone, anything, we can't leave it." The grandmother clutched her shawl tighter, shaking her head but saying nothing. Her silence was not disagreement, it was fear. She remembered stories her own mother told of men who had disappeared after venturing too close to the river. Yet when her eyes met the shepherd's, she swallowed her fear. That dog was not wrong. The teacher stood back with the baby girl, who held onto her shepherd's fur as though she could anchor him in place. The child whispered softly into his ear, "It's okay, we'll help." Her voice was small, but the shepherd seemed to hear. His growls lowered into whines, his eyes fixed on the dark waters below. The farmer tied the rope around his waist while the policeman checked the knots twice, pulling them tight. 2 lanterns were secured to the end of long poles, lowered toward the water so their glow could reach the shadows beneath the bridge. The light flickered across the stone supports, revealing moss, dripping vines, and the black emptiness of places the sun had not touched in decades. The roar of the river grew louder as the farmer slowly lowered himself down, boots searching for a foothold against the slick stone. The rope strained under his weight, creaking like the voice of the old bridge itself. Above, the crowd leaned over, lanterns raised, watching every movement with held breath. The shepherd barked furiously, darting from one end of the bridge to the other, whining whenever the farmer disappeared into the darkness. "Do you see anything?" the policeman shouted over the water's roar. The farmer paused, lantern swinging in his hand. The light skimmed across the stone, catching strange shapes clinging to the underside of the bridge, twisted branches caught in the current, scraps of cloth tangled in vines. His heart beat faster. For a moment, he thought he saw something else, something more deliberate than nature's chaos. "There's something down here," he cried. "But I need to get closer." The rope lowered further, the lantern's glow bouncing wildly off the water. The farmer reached the lowest ledge, just above the crashing waves. He crouched, steadying himself against the slick wall. His light revealed the dark hollow beneath the center arch of the bridge, a shadowed cavity where the current swirled unnaturally. It looked less like a natural pocket and more like a hidden chamber carved by time. Above, the shepherd growled low and deep, his body pressed flat to the stone as if he wanted to leap after the farmer. The baby girl hugged him tighter, whispering again. He whined in return, nose twitching toward the hidden hollow. The policeman tied a second rope around his waist and called to the crowd. "Hold steady!" He descended quickly, his lantern brighter, casting clearer light across the hidden recess. When he reached the farmer's ledge, both men leaned forward, their lights meeting in the dark space. The glow revealed more than branches. There were shapes wedged between the stones, an old wooden plank, broken and rotting, and what looked like remnants of cloth clinging stubbornly against the current. The farmer reached out with the end of his lantern pole and tugged. The cloth came loose, floating down into the river. It wasn't just cloth, it was fabric from a blanket, faded and torn by years of water. Gasps rose from above as the townsfolk saw it drift away. The teacher's hand flew to her mouth. The grandmother's cane shook where she held it against the stones. The shepherd barked wildly, pulling so hard against the little girl's grip that the farmer worried he might hurl himself over the edge. "There's more here," the policeman said grimly. "We need to check every inch." The ropes were adjusted again, lowering the men closer to the hollow. The water spray soaked their clothes, the chill biting deep, but they kept their lanterns high, scanning every crack, every stone. What they saw made their stomachs twist. More scraps of fabric. Small wooden splinters. Something had been here once. Something man-made, something hidden deliberately. The farmer looked up toward the crowd, his voice heavy. "This isn't just the river. There's a story buried under this bridge." The shepherd's howl echoed across the night, carrying not just urgency, but sorrow. It was the kind of sound that made hearts ache, the kind that told everyone watching that they were standing on the edge of a truth long forgotten. The policeman pulled himself back up slightly, his face pale in the lantern glow. "We'll need more men," he said firmly, "and more light. Whatever is under here, it won't stay hidden much longer." The crowd stirred uneasily, torn between fear and the pull of curiosity. The grandmother finally broke the silence. "If the dog led us here, we cannot turn away now. What waits under this bridge has been waiting too long." And as the rescuers climbed back to the bridge, dripping and trembling, the shepherd barked again, pressing his body to the edge. His message was clear. This was only the beginning. The night grew heavier as the mist thickened, wrapping itself around the bridge like a shroud. The lantern flames shook against the cold wind, their trembling glow pushing back just enough darkness for the rescuers to continue. The German shepherd had not rested for a moment. His body rigid, his paws scraping against the stone as though he wanted to dig straight through it. His bark had become sharper now, filled not only with urgency but with a strange sorrow that pierced every listener's heart. Then, suddenly, a shout broke the silence. "There's something here." The farmer's voice carried up from the ledge where he clung, his lantern swinging wildly against the black stone. The crowd above gasped and rushed closer to the edge, their breaths steaming in the night air. The policeman steadied the rope with both hands, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the farmer below. "What do you see?" he called down, raising his voice above the roar of the river. The farmer struggled against the spray of the water, pointing his lantern at the hollow tucked beneath the arch of the bridge. Wood. Old planks, wedged into the rocks. Not driftwood, this was built. His voice cracked with disbelief. It's a space. A hidden space under here. The shepherd barked furiously, as if confirming the farmer's discovery. He clawed at the edge, straining so hard that the baby girl in the blue dress clutched his collar with both hands, her little face pale with both fear and trust. Her soft voice trembled as she whispered, "Go on, find it, please." The policeman adjusted the rope again and descended beside the farmer. Their lanterns swung together now, throwing light deeper into the cavity. What had once looked like nothing but shadows began to reveal itself as something constructed with intention. The planks formed a crude shelf, reinforced against the stone walls with nails long rusted by time. The water slapped against it, but enough remained intact to suggest that someone had worked hard to build this place, a secret corner hidden away from the world above. A smell rose from the hollow as the policeman brushed away moss and vines. It was sharp and heavy, the smell of dampness and rot, of years swallowed by the river's breath. People above covered their noses with their sleeves. The grandmother whispered a prayer, her voice trembling as though her words might steady the fear gripping her chest. The farmer reached carefully with his lantern pole, nudging at the planks. One gave way, sending a dark splash into the river below. The sound was like a groan, as if the bridge itself was sighing after holding its secret for far too long. Then something else slid loose, an object tumbling from the shelf onto the ledge. The lantern light revealed it clearly, a torn piece of fabric, once a blanket, now ragged and heavy with dampness. The policeman bent down, lifting it carefully with gloved hands. It was small, patterned faintly with flowers that had long faded. His throat tightened. This belonged to a child. His voice was low, yet every person above felt it strike deep inside them. The shepherd's barking intensified, echoing across the bridge, as if demanding they continue. The baby girl pressed her face against his fur, tears filling her eyes though she could not have known why. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, their fears growing heavier with every passing moment. The farmer's lantern caught on something else wedged in the hollow. He reached, tugged, and pulled free a small, broken doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one glass eye missing, the other staring blankly in the lantern glow. Its dress was torn, stained by time and water, but it was unmistakable. A child had once clutched it tightly, had once sought comfort in its presence. Now it lay in the farmer's hand like a whisper from a forgotten story. Gasps spread through the crowd above. The teacher pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. The grandmother let out a soft cry, remembering stories of children who had gone missing decades ago. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "This is not driftwood. This is someone's sorrow." But the discoveries did not end there. As the policeman reached deeper into the hollow, his fingers touched metal. He pulled, and a rusted tin box emerged, its lid corroded, its sides dented. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, as though it carried more than just the weight of years. Carefully, he placed it on the ledge, both men leaning close as they forced the brittle lid open. The stench of damp paper and decay rushed out. Inside, wrapped in fragments of cloth, were letters, soaked, faded, but still legible in places. Photographs, too, their edges curled, their faces blurred by water. And among them, tiny trinkets, a child's ribbon, a button shaped like a star, a rusted locket. The crowd above was silent now, stunned into stillness. Even the roar of the river seemed distant, muffled by the weight of what had been uncovered. Each item was not just an object. It was a piece of a life, a story hidden beneath the bridge for reasons no one yet understood. The policeman's voice trembled as he held one of the photographs up to the lantern. The image was faint, but the outline of a young face could still be seen. "Someone hid this here," he said quietly. "Someone wanted this never to be found." The shepherd's bark rang out again, louder than before, echoing through the mist like a command. He lunged toward the edge, whining furiously, his whole body demanding they go deeper. The baby girl clung to him, whispering through her tears, "We'll help, we'll find it." The farmer met the policeman's eyes. Both men nodded. They knew the search could not stop here. Whatever was beneath the bridge was no accident. This was a hidden life, a secret sorrow carved into the stones of their town's history. The grandmother, clutching her cane, finally spoke in a trembling voice. "The dog is telling us what we have ignored for too long. There is a truth buried here, and it will not rest until we bring it into the light." Above, the townsfolk lit more lanterns, lowering them one by one until the underside of the bridge glowed like a hidden cavern. The air was thick with fear and anticipation, with grief and curiosity. The baby girl's small hands stayed on her shepherd's back, steadying him, steadying herself. And as the rescuers prepared to dig further into the hollow, the shepherd threw his head back and howled. It was not just a bark this time. It was a cry that carried every unspoken sorrow of the forgotten, every memory buried in the darkness. It sent chills through every spine and tears to many eyes. The bridge, once just a silent passage over water, had become something else entirely. It was now a keeper of secrets, a vessel of grief, and the doorway to a story no one in town was ready to face. But the shepherd was ready. He would not leave, not until the truth was known. The bridge grew eerily quiet after the first objects were brought up. The torn blanket, the broken doll, and the rusted tin box lay on the stone surface, lantern light flickering across them like candles in a church. No one spoke for a long while. The only sound was the river, still roaring as if it wanted to wash away the truths that had been disturbed. At last, the grandmother broke the silence. Her voice was soft, fragile, like a thread barely holding. "This isn't the first time," she whispered. "Not the first time this bridge has taken something it shouldn't." Her words turned every head toward her. The teacher leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The grandmother's eyes were misted with age and memory. She gripped her cane as though steadying not just her body but her heart. "When I was a girl, there was a family who lived near the mill. Their boy, he was only 7, disappeared one evening. They searched the fields, the woods, every road. For weeks, the whole town joined in. But they never found him. Some whispered he had fallen into the river near this bridge." She swallowed hard. Others said he was taken. But the truth was never known. The farmer set down his lantern, his face lined with shadow. "I remember that story. My father used to tell me never to linger near the bridge at dusk. He said the water carried more than fish, it carried souls." The townsfolk shivered. What had begun as curiosity was growing into something deeper, something heavier. This bridge was no longer just a structure of stone and wood. It was becoming a vessel of memory, a place where sorrows had gathered like mist. The policeman spoke, his voice firm but tinged with unease. "We don't deal in curses and old tales. But these things," he gestured toward the blanket, the doll, the box, "they prove someone lived under here or hid things here for a reason." The German shepherd growled low, pulling everyone's attention back to the edge. His body stiffened, nose pressed against the cracks in the stone. His paws scraped furiously, nails scratching until sparks almost seemed to fly. Then, with a sharp bark, he dug at the beams just beneath the ledge. Something small and pale emerged, caught between the wood and the stone. The farmer reached carefully and pulled it free. When the lantern light touched it, a wave of grief swept over the crowd. It was a child's shoe, tiny, leather-worn thin, the sole cracked, but still intact. Its laces were frayed, tied in the awkward knot of a hand too small to do it well. The air grew so heavy that it felt like no one could breathe. The teacher covered her mouth, whispering, "Dear Lord." Her mind leapt to her students, to the little shoes that tapped down the schoolhouse hall each morning. This one had once tapped too, but its wearer never came home. The grandmother's tears fell freely now. That boy. I remember his mother, standing at her door every evening for months, waiting, hoping he would run back to her. She never stopped waiting, not until the day she died. Her words cut through the night like a knife. The baby girl, too young to understand fully, pressed herself against her shepherd, sensing the weight in the air. She patted his fur, whispering in her tiny voice, "It's okay, we found it." But her innocence only deepened the ache in the hearts of those around her. The townsfolk began to murmur, one after another, their voices trembling as they recalled other shadows. A wanderer who vanished near the bridge one winter. A traveling family whose wagon was found abandoned by the roadside, but no trace of them. Stories that had become whispers, warnings told to children but never fully explained. And now, those whispers seemed to rise like fog, wrapping around everyone with cold certainty. The policeman, holding the small shoe in his gloved hand, stared at it as though it were burning him. "This bridge hides more than we ever knew," he said quietly. "And the dog, he won't stop until we uncover all of it." The shepherd whined softly, his nose pressed against the ground where the shoe had been. He pawed again, circling restlessly, his body vibrating with purpose. He was not satisfied. He was telling them, in the only way he could, that the story wasn't finished. The farmer shook his head, eyes heavy with sorrow. "All these years we crossed this bridge, and none of us ever thought to look beneath it. We built our lives, raised our families, while a child's shoe sat here waiting." The teacher placed a gentle hand on the grandmother's shoulder. "Maybe the dog is giving us a chance to make it right," she whispered, "to remember what was forgotten." Lantern light flickered across every face. No one wanted to say it aloud, but they all felt it. The bridge had carried not only their footsteps but also their secrets. And now, the shepherd had chosen to uncover them. The baby girl leaned against her dog, her blue dress brushing the damp stone, her little eyes wide. She didn't speak in the way adults did, but her small hands resting on the shepherd's back seemed to echo the same truth everyone was beginning to understand. This was no ordinary animal. This was a guardian of memories, pulling from the dark what people had long chosen to leave buried. The policeman finally straightened, holding the shoe high so all could see. His voice was solemn. "This is no longer just about mystery. This is about respect, about truth. The dog has led us here for a reason, and we must follow where he leads." The German shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding, as if in agreement. His eyes glowed in the lantern light, fierce yet sorrowful, and every heart trembled with both fear and resolve. The grandmother wiped her tears, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "If the bridge has hidden the pain of children, then we must give those children their dignity back. Their stories must be told." The mist swirled thicker, curling around the lantern flames like a veil. The torn blanket, the broken doll, the rusted box, the shoe, all of them lay together now, silent witnesses of lives lost to the shadows of the bridge. And beside them, the shepherd stood tall, his chest rising and falling, his gaze fixed firmly on the darkness below. The truth was clear to everyone. This was no accident of nature. The bridge had been keeping secrets, and the dog had become the voice of those who could no longer speak. And so, with trembling hands and hearts heavy with memory, the townsfolk prepared to search deeper. The story was no longer about fear or rumor. It had become something much greater, an unspoken promise to the past. The bridge had already given up too many secrets, yet the German shepherd would not rest. His paws scraped at the stone, His body quivered with an urgency no one could ignore. The small shoe lay on the ground beside the torn blanket and broken doll, but his nose kept working, pushing forward, pressing against the cracks as if telling them that something still lived in the shadows. The farmer and policeman, still standing on the narrow ledge beneath the bridge, exchanged a glance. The farmer's lantern swung in his grip, casting golden light across wet stone. "He's not done," he muttered. "That dog's telling us there's more." The shepherd suddenly threw back his head and barked with a force that echoed into the night, sharp and relentless, carrying over the roar of the river. Then he lunged toward the edge so violently that the baby girl stumbled while clinging to his collar. "Easy, boy," the teacher cried, steadying the child. But the shepherd would not be soothed. He growled, barked again, and pawed furiously, his body straining as if something in the darkness was calling to him. Then came a sound no one expected. Faint, fragile, almost drowned by the water's thunder. A whimper. At first, the townsfolk thought it was their imagination, a trick of the river. But then it came again, thin and desperate, slipping through the noise like a cry from the very bones of the bridge. The grandmother gasped and clutched her shawl. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The policeman's eyes narrowed, his lantern sweeping the hollow. "There's something alive down there." His words were both hope and dread. The shepherd barked wildly now, nearly flinging himself from the bridge. His claws scraped sparks against the stone. He knew what they heard, and he wasn't about to wait for them to act. His chest heaved with frantic urgency, his eyes locked on the dark recess. The farmer braced himself against the wall and pushed deeper toward the hollow. His boots slipped against moss, his rope creaked under the strain, but he pressed on. "Hold me steady," he shouted up. The townsfolk tightened their grip on the rope, their knuckles white, hearts pounding. The lantern light flickered across the wooden planks wedged into the rocks, the secret shelf that had already surrendered its hidden treasures. Now, as the farmer pressed closer, he heard it clearly, the soft, pitiful cry of something alive, muffled by debris and damp wood. "Here," he shouted, his voice breaking. "There's something trapped under these boards." Above, the shepherd barked so violently that his body shook. The baby girl wrapped her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't understand fully, but she knew her friend was begging them to save a life. The policeman joined the farmer on the ledge, wedging his lantern into a crack to free both hands. Together they pulled at the rotten planks. The wood groaned, splintering in their hands, sending shards into the rushing water below. The stench of damp earth and decay grew stronger. And then, from beneath the rubble, a pair of tiny eyes glistened in the lamplight. "Dear Lord," the farmer whispered. He reached with shaking hands, clearing away the last of the debris. And there it was, a puppy, no older than a few weeks, wedged in the darkness, its body thin as bones, its fur soaked and matted. Its whimper was so weak it sounded more like a sigh. The policeman scooped it gently into his arms, cradling it against his chest. The puppy trembled violently, its ribs pressing against skin, its nose cold and wet. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The roar of the river dulled, the mist hung still, and every eye above filled with tears. Gasps rose from the crowd. The teacher pressed both hands to her heart. The grandmother wept openly, whispering prayers through her sobs. The farmer climbed back up the rope with the policeman behind him, their prize clutched carefully in their arms. When they reached the top, the lantern light fell on the pitiful bundle. The puppy whimpered again, its tiny body shaking from cold and hunger. The shepherd barked once, sharp and proud, his tail stiff with determination. He stepped forward and sniffed the little creature, then pressed his nose against its wet fur as though to reassure it. "You are safe now." The baby girl broke free from her teacher's grasp and ran forward, her blue dress brushing against the damp stone. She knelt beside her shepherd, her small hands trembling as she reached for the puppy. The townsfolk held their breath as she lifted it gently, pressing it against her chest. The puppy gave a faint cry, then nestled into her arms as though it had finally found warmth it had been searching for. The child smiled through her tears, rocking it softly. You're safe now," she whispered. The sight melted every heart. Rough men who had swung hammers and ropes wiped their eyes. Women clutched each other's hands, unable to contain their sobs. Even the policeman, hardened by years of grim duty, looked away for a moment, his throat too tight to speak. The shepherd stood tall beside the baby girl, chest out, eyes sharp. His stance was not relaxed. It was protective. He planted himself firmly at her side, as though daring the river itself to try and take back what had been returned to life. The grandmother lifted her lantern high, her face shining with both tears and pride. "That dog saved it," she declared in a trembling voice. "He knew. He wouldn't leave because he knew." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, some pressing their hands over their hearts. Hope, long buried under fear and memory, flickered back to life in the glow of the lanterns. The puppy whimpered again, this time softer, and licked the baby girl's hand. She giggled faintly through her tears, clutching it closer. The shepherd sniffed the little one once more, then looked at the crowd with steady eyes. He had brought them to this moment, and he stood now like a sentinel, guarding both the child who had found him and the new life he had helped rescue. No one dared speak too loudly. The air was too sacred. The roar of the river seemed softer now, almost reverent, as if it too was bowing to the miracle that had taken place beneath the bridge. At last, the policeman said quietly, "We need to get this little one to warmth, to food. It won't survive the night otherwise." The teacher pulled her shawl off and wrapped it around the puppy in the girl's arms. The grandmother added her scarf, tucking it gently. And together, the townsfolk began to walk back from the bridge, lanterns swaying, tears falling freely, but hearts lifted by the life that had been saved. Behind them, the German shepherd gave one last bark toward the hollow beneath the bridge, a sound that echoed into the night. It was not a bark of sorrow anymore. It was victory. And as he trotted proudly beside the baby girl, his tail finally lifted high, everyone knew that what had been found that night was not just a puppy. It was hope itself, rescued from the shadows. The night after the rescue felt unlike any other the little town had known. Lanterns still burned in a few windows, long past the usual hour of sleep, as whispers of what had happened at the bridge spread from home to home. People spoke softly, not out of disbelief, but out of reverence, because they all knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The puppy, frail and trembling, was carried carefully to the town's only veterinary clinic. The policeman had taken the lead, cradling the small bundle wrapped in shawls and scarves. The German shepherd walked close by, never straying more than a step away, his protective eyes following every move. The baby girl in her blue dress trotted beside him, her tiny hand resting against his back as if steadying both of them. At the clinic, the old vet, whose hands had healed countless animals over the years, hurried forward with surprising speed. He pulled the shawl back gently, and his eyes softened at the sight of the weak little body. "Poor thing," he murmured, "but it's still breathing. That means we have a chance." He placed the puppy on a blanket-lined table near the fire, warming its icy paws between his palms. A bowl of milk was set down, and though the pup was too weak to lap it at first, a few drops on its tongue stirred the smallest response. The baby girl clapped her hands and giggled with delight. The shepherd wagged his tail slowly, a rare moment of calm after the storm of his earlier urgency. Hours passed, but the town did not leave. Men and women crowded quietly into the clinic, lining the walls, standing in doorways, each waiting with bated breath for signs of life. Old grief weighed heavy on their shoulders. memories of children and wanderers lost to the bridge, but here, before their very eyes, was proof that not everything ended in sorrow. The grandmother, her hands shaking, whispered, "I never thought I'd see hope come from that place." "Never." The teacher nodded, her eyes damp. "Maybe this is what we've been waiting for. A reason to let go of the fear." When the puppy finally raised its head and gave a faint cry, the room erupted in soft gasps. Some laughed, some wept openly, and some pressed their hands together in prayer. The baby girl squealed with joy, reaching out as the vet gently placed the puppy into her lap. She stroked its fur with tiny fingers, and the pup, weak as it was, nuzzled into her warmth. The German shepherd sat tall beside them, his chest swelling with pride. He leaned his head down and gave the rescued puppy a tender lick, as though passing strength into it. The sight melted every heart. A hush fell, not of fear, but of awe. By morning, the story had reached every corner of town. The bridge was no longer just a place of sorrow. It had become the place where life had been pulled back from the shadows. People who had avoided it for years now looked upon it with new eyes. For the first time, it was a place that offered hope instead of only grief. The townsfolk hailed the shepherd as a hero. Wherever he walked, people bent to stroke his fur, to whisper words of gratitude, to give him scraps of food he had once refused. Yet he never left the baby girl's side. She was his anchor, his companion, the one he trusted most. Together, they became a living reminder of what had been saved. Even the hardest men in town, those whose faces rarely showed emotion, softened when they saw the girl's innocent smile as she carried the puppy in her arms. Her joy was so pure it seeped into every heart, reminding them of something they had almost forgotten, that even in a world marked by loss, new beginnings were always possible. The farmer, who had risked his life climbing down to the ledge, shook his head in wonder. "I thought I was just following a dog's noise," he said to the crowd one morning. But that bark saved a life. It wasn't just noise. It was a voice. The policeman, once skeptical, stood taller now when people thanked him. But he always pointed to the shepherd and said, "Don't thank me. Thank him. He's the one who wouldn't give up." Children in town began to follow the girl and her two dogs, one strong and proud, the other tiny and recovering, through the streets. They laughed, they played, and for the first time in years, the sound of joy echoed louder than the whispers of tragedy. Parents watched from doorways, smiles tugging at their lips, tears in their eyes. The bridge, once feared, had been transformed in their minds. It was no longer only a reminder of what they had lost. It was now the place where courage, instinct, and innocence had pulled life from the darkness. And at the center of it all was the German shepherd, whose loyalty and unyielding spirit had turned despair into hope. The baby girl's laughter carried through the town as she cradled the puppy against her chest, her shepherd guarding proudly by her side. And everywhere they went, people smiled, because in that simple scene, they saw the truth that life, no matter how fragile, could always find a way back. The bridge had never seen so many lanterns glowing at once. On the evening after the rescue, the entire town seemed to drift toward that old stone crossing, each person carrying something in their hands: flowers, candles, photographs, or simply their own quiet memories. What had once been a place of fear now glimmered with light. The mist still clung to the water, but instead of swallowing sound, it carried the soft hum of voices and the rustle of footsteps. The German shepherd stood tall at the heart of the gathering, his body relaxed now but his eyes still sharp, watching the river with the same loyalty that had led him there. Beside him sat the baby girl in her blue dress, the rescued puppy curled against her lap. She hummed softly, her little hands stroking its fur, her smile as innocent as the dawn. Around her, the townsfolk settled in, their candles flickering like stars caught close to earth. The grandmother was the first to speak. She raised her cane slightly and looked into the glow of her lantern. "This bridge has taken much from us," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough for all to hear. "But tonight it has given something back. That dog and that child. They have reminded us of what we forgot, that even the darkest places can hold light if we dare to look." Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Some placed flowers along the stone railing, petals soft against the weathered surface. Others knelt to set their candles down, their flames reflecting in the rushing water below. The schoolteacher stepped forward next. Her eyes were heavy with memory as she held a small book against her chest. "Years ago, I lost a student to these waters. For too long, I blamed the bridge as though it were cursed. But tonight I see it differently. This place was never meant to be feared, it was meant to be understood. And it took a dog's heart to show us what our eyes refused to see." She bent down, laying a flower near the shoe, the doll, and the tin box that had been brought from the hollow. The farmer cleared his throat, his hands rough and calloused from years of work. "I didn't believe at first," he admitted. "I thought it was just noise. But that shepherd knew. He wouldn't leave because he understood what we couldn't. And I'll never again doubt that animals see truths we turn away from. Sometimes they are the ones who carry our burdens, waiting for us to catch up." The policeman added nothing at first, but he placed his lantern on the bridge and let its light join the others. His silence spoke louder than words, a silence of respect, of surrender to the truth uncovered. The baby girl shifted slightly, laughing as the rescued puppy licked her cheek. The sound cut through the solemn air like a bell of joy. People smiled despite their tears. The shepherd wagged his tail slowly, nudging the girl's shoulder, his body forming a shield around both her and the fragile life they had saved. An old hymn rose softly from the crowd, hummed first by the grandmother and then carried by others, until it drifted across the misty water. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It was simply the language of hearts bound together by grief and hope. Sometimes animals see what humans cannot, and guide us back to what must be faced. They carry us into truths we would rather leave hidden, and in doing so, they remind us that love, loyalty, and innocence never truly die. The townsfolk shared their own stories that night. A man spoke of his brother who had vanished decades ago, his voice cracking as he admitted he had never found peace. A woman shared how her child once wandered near the bridge but was pulled back just in time. Each memory poured out like drops into the river, mingling with the sound of the current until it felt as though the bridge itself was listening. And yet, through all the sorrow, there was healing. The candles burned brighter, the flowers covered more of the cold stone, and laughter returned each time the baby girl squealed at the puppy's playful movements. The German shepherd, dignified and unyielding, stood like a sentinel, his body the perfect symbol of loyalty unshaken by fear. Children who once avoided the bridge now wandered closer, placing daisies at its base, holding their parents' hands. Instead of turning away, the people leaned in as though claiming the place once more, not as a prison of memory, but as a shrine of survival. As the night deepened, the baby girl curled against her shepherd's side, the rescued puppy nestled between them. The crowd fell silent, watching the scene with tears glistening in their eyes. The three of them, a child, a loyal guardian, and a fragile survivor, had become the living image of what the town now understood: unity. The grandmother summed it best with her final words. She looked out over the glowing candles, her voice trembling but strong. "We came here tonight to honor the past, but what I see before me is the future. Hope lives in that child's smile. Courage lives in that dog's bark. And healing lives in the life that was pulled from darkness. Let us never forget what was found beneath this bridge." The lanterns swayed in the cool breeze, their flames refusing to go out. The river roared beneath, but its sound no longer felt threatening. It felt like music, like the heartbeat of a town that had faced its shadows and found light again. And so, the bridge that once carried only silence now carried voices, voices of memory, of sorrow, and of renewal. And standing at its center was the German shepherd, whose instincts had uncovered not just a hidden life, but a truth that bound the entire town together forever. Some stories leave us quiet, some leave us thoughtful, and some change the way we see the world forever. What happened at the old bridge was not just about wood, stone, or water. It was about loyalty, innocence, and the healing that comes when a community chooses to face the truth together. That German shepherd never gave up. He barked, he whined, he scratched, and he pulled until the people finally listened. In his heart, he carried a message that no one else could hear. And in following him, they not only uncovered what had been hidden in the shadows, but they rediscovered something within themselves. Beside him stood a little girl, small in size but vast in spirit, her blue dress fluttering in the evening air. She trusted her dog when no one else could understand. That trust, pure and unshaken, became the thread that held every heart together that night. And in her arms, a rescued puppy, weak yet alive, reminded them all that life always tries to rise again, even from the darkest places. The town was changed forever. Where once there was silence and fear, there was now unity and hope. Families who had carried grief for decades found themselves speaking, sharing, and healing. Strangers became neighbors again, bound not by sorrow but by compassion. All because a dog refused to move and a child refused to let go. And so the lesson remains. Animals often sense what we cannot. They see, they feel, and they know. Their loyalty reaches beyond words, and their instincts carry truths our hearts have forgotten how to hear. Sometimes, it takes their courage to remind us of our own. Now, dear listener, I ask you, do you believe dogs can sense what humans cannot? Do you believe their hearts guide them into places we dare not go? Tonight's story has shown us that sometimes the answers we fear are the ones we most need to face. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in kindness. Remind them that love is never truly lost, that innocence can heal even the oldest scars, and that loyalty is the greatest gift any creature can give. And as you leave this story behind, carry with you the image of a loyal shepherd standing guard, a child smiling through her tears, and a fragile puppy breathing new life into an entire town. That is hope. That is healing. That is the miracle of love. If you felt the power of this story, I invite you to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you believe, tell us where you're listening from, and let your voice join the circle of kindness. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that warm the heart, stir the soul, and remind us of the beauty still left in this world. Because sometimes, all it takes is a bark in the night to bring light back to where we thought it could never shine again.